Welcome to another unsettling episode of Evil Exposed Killers. I'm Charles, your guide into the dark recesses of human depravity. Tonight we delve into the story of Robert Berdella, a man whose seemingly ordinary life hid a nightmarish secret. Known as the Kansas City Butcher, Berdella's tale is one of cruelty, manipulation, and unspeakable horrors. Join me as we uncover his story. The Robert Berdella story. Robert Andrew Berdella Jr. was born on January 31, 1949, in the quiet town of Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. His early years were marked by a sense of isolation. Berdella's nearsightedness required thick glasses, making him a target for bullies. Despite his intelligence, he struggled to fit in with his peers. His father, a strict and often critical man, added to his feelings of inadequacy. As Berdella grew older, his interests took a dark turn. He developed a fascination with art, particularly works that depicted violent and macabre scenes. This interest would later become a significant part of his adult life, blending seamlessly into his criminal activities. In 1967, Berdella moved to Kansas City to attend the Kansas City Art Institute. His time there was short-lived. Feeling disconnected from the institution, he dropped out after a year. Despite this setback, Berdella remained in Kansas City, where he started a business selling art and antiques. His expertise in rare and unusual items earned him a reputation, and his home in the Hyde Park neighborhood became a repository for his eclectic collections. Beneath the veneer of a respectable businessman, Berdella harbored sinister impulses. In the early 1980s, these impulses began to manifest in the most horrifying ways. He started luring young men to his home, often using promises of work, drugs, or shelter. Once inside, they would find themselves trapped in a nightmare. The first known victim was Jerry Howell, a 19-year-old acquaintance. On July 5, 1984, Berdella offered Howell a ride to a dance contest. Instead, he drove him to his home, where he drugged Howell with sedatives. What followed was a night of unimaginable horror. Howell was bound and subjected to a series of tortures that Berdella meticulously documented in a journal. He applied electric shocks to Howell's genitals, inserted needles under his fingernails, and repeatedly sodomized him. Howell endured hours of agony before succumbing to a lethal combination of asphyxiation and drug overdose. Berdella dismembered Howell's body and disposed of it in trash bags, scattering the remains throughout the city. Emboldened by his ability to get away with murder, Berdella continued his spree. In April 1985, he lured Robert Sheldon, a transient man, to his home with the promise of shelter. Sheldon quickly found himself in a similar predicament. Berdella used a variety of methods to torture Sheldon, including applying drain cleaner to his eyes, which caused excruciating pain and blindness. He also inserted needles into sensitive areas of Sheldon's body and used electric shocks to inflict further torment. This horrific ordeal lasted for days before Berdella decided to end Sheldon's suffering. He suffocated him and, as before, dismembered the body, disposing of the parts in various locations. The third known victim was Mark Wallace, another transient, who was lured to Berdella's home in June 1985. Wallace's torture was equally brutal. Berdella used electric shocks, needles, and other implements to inflict severe pain. The torture was methodical, with Berdella taking notes on the reactions of his victims, as if experimenting to find the most effective means of causing pain. Wallace, like the others, eventually succumbed to his injuries, and his body was dismembered and discarded. As the bodies piled up, Berdella's confidence grew. He believed he had perfected a method of capturing, torturing, and disposing of his victims without arousing suspicion. His home, filled with art and antiques, concealed the true nature of his activities. Friends and acquaintances saw him as eccentric but harmless, unaware of the horrors that took place within his walls. Berdella's ability to blend into society while committing such heinous acts is a chilling reminder of the potential for evil that can hide in plain sight. The meticulous nature of his tortures, the cold calculation with which he carried out his murders, and the utter disregard for human life all paint a picture of a man driven by dark and incomprehensible urges. By mid-1985, Robert Berdella had honed his gruesome methods, becoming more confident and meticulous with each new victim. The sense of control and power he derived from torturing and killing his captives fueled his depravity, leading him to commit even more heinous acts. James Ferris, a 25-year-old man, became Berdella's next known victim. In September 1985, Ferris accepted Berdella's offer of a place to stay. Ferris's ordeal was particularly brutal. Berdella drugged Ferris, and once he was incapacitated, subjected him to a series of tortures that lasted for 2 days. Ferris was tied to Berdella's infamous torture board, a device he had constructed specifically for his sadistic purposes. Throughout this period, Berdella meticulously recorded Ferris's responses to each form of torture, documenting every scream and cry for mercy as if conducting a macabre experiment. Ferris eventually succumbed to his injuries and was dismembered like the others before him. Berdella's next victim was Todd Stoops, a 23-year-old male prostitute and drug addict whom Berdella had known for some time. In June 1986, Berdella lured Stoops to his home under the pretense of rekindling their acquaintance. Once again, the promise of drugs and shelter was enough to trap Stoops in Berdella's web. The torture that Stoops endured was particularly harrowing. Over the course of 2 weeks, Berdella kept Stoops captive, inflicting prolonged and excruciating pain. Berdella's methods had evolved. He now used caustic substances to burn Stoops's eyes and injected drain cleaner into his vocal cords to silence his screams. The cruelty was relentless, with Berdella showing a complete lack of empathy or remorse. Eventually, Stoops died from a combination of dehydration, blood loss, and the physical trauma inflicted upon him. As with his previous victims, Berdella dismembered Stoops's body and disposed of the remains. In 1987, Larry Pearson, a 20-year-old acquaintance, crossed paths with Berdella. Pearson had been arrested for theft and upon his release was offered a place to stay by Berdella. Pearson accepted, unaware of the nightmare that awaited him. Pearson's captivity lasted for 6 weeks, during which he was subjected to daily torture. Berdella used all his previous methods and introduced new ones, such as breaking Pearson's hands with a metal bar to prevent escape and using a piano wire to strangle him slowly. Pearson's ordeal was one of the longest and most brutal, showcasing Berdella's escalating sadism. Finally, Pearson could endure no more and succumbed to his injuries. As before, Berdella dismembered the body and scattered the remains. The turning point in Berdella's reign of terror came in March 1988 when he abducted his final victim, Chris Bryson. Bryson, a 22-year-old male prostitute, was lured to Berdella's home with the promise of money and drugs. Once inside, Bryson was subjected to the same torturous routine as Berdella's previous victims. However, Bryson proved to be more resilient and resourceful. Despite the severe beatings and tortures, including electric shocks and injections of chemicals, Bryson managed to find a moment of opportunity. On the morning of April 2, 1988, while Berdella was away at work, Bryson, despite his injuries, managed to break free from his restraints. Naked and terrified, he leaped from a second-story window and ran to a neighbor's house seeking help. The neighbors, shocked by Bryson's appearance and his desperate pleas, immediately called the police. When the authorities arrived at Berdella's house, they found a scene of unimaginable horror. The evidence of torture and murder was everywhere: photographs, journals, and a variety of instruments used to inflict pain. Berdella's meticulous records provided a clear and damning account of his crimes. The police quickly arrested him, and the full extent of his depravity began to unfold. Robert Berdella's capture ended a reign of terror that had claimed the lives of at least 6 young men. His detailed documentation of his crimes not only sealed his fate, but also provided a haunting glimpse into the mind of a man driven by cruelty and sadism. The ordinary facade he presented to the world had hidden one of the most brutal serial killers in American history. Berdella was immediately arrested and charged with several counts of sexual assault and first-degree murder. During the investigation, the true extent of his crimes became apparent. The remains of his victims, meticulously dismembered and disposed of, were identified through forensic analysis. Families of missing young men were given the grim news that their loved ones had fallen victim to the Kansas City butcher. The trial of Robert Berdella began in July 1988 and quickly became one of the most sensational in the city's history. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, including Berdella's own meticulous records and photographs, which left little room for doubt about his guilt. Testimonies from forensic experts detailed the horrific injuries sustained by the victims and the methods used to inflict them. Chris Bryson, the key witness, provided a harrowing account of his time in captivity. He described the tortures he endured, the psychological manipulation, and his desperate escape. Bryson's testimony painted a vivid picture of Berdella's cruelty and reinforced the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution. Berdella's defense team attempted to argue that he was mentally ill, driven by uncontrollable urges stemming from his abusive childhood. They claimed he lacked the capacity to understand the full extent of his actions. However, the sheer volume of evidence documenting his careful planning and methodical execution of his crimes undermined this argument. On August 5, 1988, Robert Berdella was convicted of 6 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The verdict brought a measure of justice to the families of his victims, but the scars left by his actions would endure. While in prison, Berdella maintained a facade of cooperation, participating in interviews and psychiatric evaluations. He provided chilling insights into his motives and the psychology behind his actions. Berdella claimed that his murders were a way to exert control and power, compensating for the feelings of inadequacy and helplessness that had plagued him throughout his life. In 1992, Berdella died of a heart attack in prison, bringing an end to his life, but not to the impact of his crimes. The legacy of his brutality left a lasting mark on the community and on the field of criminal psychology. His case became a subject of study for those seeking to understand the minds of serial killers and the factors that drive them to commit such heinous acts. The investigation into Berdella's activities also led to significant changes in law enforcement practices. The meticulous documentation and detailed records he kept provided invaluable insights into the methods of a serial killer. These insights have since been used to improve profiling techniques and investigative methods, helping to prevent similar crimes in the future. The story of Robert Berdella is a stark reminder of the potential for darkness within the human soul. His ability to blend into society, hiding his monstrous nature behind a veneer of normalcy, underscores the importance of vigilance and awareness. The pain and suffering he inflicted on his victims and their families serve as a testament to the need for continued efforts to understand and prevent such atrocities. As we conclude this episode, we are left with a haunting image of a man who epitomized evil. Robert Berdella's story is one of unimaginable cruelty, but it also serves as a catalyst for greater understanding and awareness of the horrors that can lurk beneath the surface of ordinary life. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the life and crimes of Robert Berdella, the Kansas City butcher. His story is a reminder of the darkness that can hide behind an ordinary facade and the necessity of remaining alert to the hidden dangers around us. If you found this episode compelling, please like and subscribe to Evil Exposed for more in-depth true crime stories. By exploring these cases, we aim to deepen our understanding of such chilling realities. I'm Charles, and this has been Evil Exposed. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and take care.